Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to a special Newsmakers featuring election 2024 coverage. I'm Anthony Moreno. On this hour-long program, we take a look at the contested primary race for district attorney for the 3rd Judicial District in Doña Ana County. The Republican candidate, Michael Cain, is running unopposed in the GOP primary, but that can't be said for the Democratic primary, where 4 candidates are running in a competitive race. On this special episode, we'll hear from Democratic District Attorney candidates Ramona Martinez, incumbent Gerald Byers, Fernando Macias, and Shahrazad Booth. We now go to KRWG's multimedia journalist Jonny Coker, who will be joined by the Democratic District Attorney candidates who share why they are running for this office.
Thanks, Anthony, for that introduction. I'm now joined by our first guest, Attorney Ramona Martinez. Ramona, tell us about yourself and your qualifications to serve as the District Attorney in Doña Ana County.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And first of all, thank you for actually paying attention to this race. It's really important.
Of course.
I've been an attorney for the last decade, but I've been serving New Mexicans for almost 20 years now. I have been a criminal defense attorney, so I've been on the front lines. I'm in the courtroom every day seeing what's going on with the district attorney's office. And I have been in public service but beyond that, about 10 years in working in the state executive levels and working in the governor's office. My first job was constituent services, so constituent services and connecting with the community is extremely important to me because I understand that when you understand and engage what's going on with the community, you get what's going on. Those issues, then you figure out what's going on with your own office.
Thanks for that. And so what sort of reform in New Mexico's criminal justice system would you like to see?
Well, thankfully there are things that are being worked on right now up in Santa Fe, specifically dealing with mental health and diversion programs. So essentially I have been advocating or will be legislating and have been working on these issues, specifically addressing people with mental health issues and behavioral health services, which currently Doña Ana is lacking right now. We're the 2nd largest county, but we definitely need more services in that area. So with regards to that diversion program, sending people, what that means is sending people to get mental health medication management and being connected with behavioral health services is direly needed in this county.
And so sort of just going off of that, what do you think of using harm reduction as a way to deal with non-violent offenses, such as low-level drug possession?
So essentially with pre-prosecution diversion programs, essentially, those are, giving people that opportunity to get drug treatment, being able to get drug treatment programs, being able to get behavioral health services. So those type of diversion programs are part of my platform and what I'm advocating for as district attorney. I think that those type of programs, because we have to address the root levels of crime, right? We can't lock up all our problems, and until we are addressing those root causes of crime, we're going to continue to have the same issues dealing with those type of issues.
I see. So how would you improve collaboration between your office and local law enforcement?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty simplistic in the sense that, number one, you have a liaison with the district attorney's office that is directly a liaison to law enforcement, but also in the sense that you begin collaborating with the community, whether it's, in my mind, I'm envisioning a task force of where we would come together with the different community stakeholders, the university, city, local, city and county government leaders, to be able to pull our resources together to be able to build these diversion programs. It's not unheard of. We're not inventing the wheel. These already exist all over the nation. So, and we used to have one that was a great program. It was a jail diversion program that unfortunately was not funded I don't know, for the last couple of years. So those type of things are very easy to do, but it just takes a leader to be able to bring the community together.
I see. So can you explain how you would handle a fatal use of force incident involving a law enforcement officer? How is that something that you would deal with as district attorney?
So, first of all, it's very important that you have a thorough investigation on those type of cases. Number one, that I think that's the first and foremost, that you're ensuring that you are gathering all the evidence and making sure that everyone's interviewed at that point. Those type, and you might also consider an independent investigation as well, to ensure that everybody is being treated fairly and that everybody, including the officer and the victims, are getting their fair shake throughout the whole process. Those type of cases are extremely difficult to deal with because depending on their training and they're police officers. So I think making sure that you work with law enforcement themselves, to be able to prevent this from the beginning, I think that's extremely important, that you create that level of relationship, because I think preventative measures first is what you want to address initially, and then making sure that the investigation is done thoroughly.
So what do you think needs to be done to address the backlog of cases in our court system right now?
Well, first of all, the district attorney's office is not fully staffed, so that's issue number one. So first and foremost is stopping the bleeding. We need to triage that office because there's not nearly enough attorneys to be able to handle the number of cases that are going through that office. So we need at least twice the number of felony attorneys in the office, and right now they have half of that. So first of all, it's active recruitment, which means either going to the law school here at UNM, going to to the bordering law schools, ensuring that you as a district attorney are there present and actively recruiting, and including from the local bar. So that's the first issue, is being able to do that. And once you do that, then you start triaging those cases from the most serious. Which cases do we need to get rid of, either by plea policies, offering fast track pleas, and so on and so forth.
I see. So how would you navigate competency in pre-trial detention laws, in order to keep dangerous individuals off the street? And I know that's a big question, so I'll give you the floor on that one.
Right, that's a very complex issue, and it's something that I would actually say that I'm one of the few attorneys out of all the candidates who understands the issue extremely well. I contract with the Public Defender's Office. I was also a public defender, and the Public Defender's Office handles a majority of those cases. Again, on behalf of Doña County, I was up in Santa Fe because the governor actually had a bill on that issue. But it's the issue. The first problem is we don't have the infrastructure to deal with these type of problems. So in other words, we don't have treatment programs to help those who are not competent become competent. And it's a two different things. It's two different issues that people need to understand. One, it's the issue of people not being competent, having to understand the criminal proceedings. And then the second issue is those who do understand the proceedings but maybe just need medication management, just need to be connected with health professionals. So that is one of my number one priorities is again to start dealing with these issues through diversion programs and helping people to understand what competency really means in legal terms.
Sure. And so we kind of flew through those questions, so I'll give you the stage, as it were. What sets you apart from your opponents, and what is your appeal to voters as we approach the June primaries? What is it that you want folks to know?
Sure. So as a native New Mexican, I am being in Las Cruces and practicing for my entire legal career, I understand what our community needs. I think what sets me apart is that I have been advocating on these issues, again, serving New Mexicans for almost 20 years. I not only have the political experience, but I think I have a wealth of experience being in the public sector and also running my own law firm, which I've been in business for about 5 years now. So all of those together, I think, makes me the best candidate. And most importantly, to put it simplistically, I care about criminal justice. It's been my passion. It's what I've been doing for my entire life. And I just care about the community. And so I think that I can genuinely make a difference because I just genuinely care about about doing this, not out of my own ego, but for our community, because Doniana deserves a lot better at this point.
And Ramona, I mean, if there's one thing you wanted people to walk away with after hearing this interview, what would that be? Yeah,
so I think that I would, deserve people's vote because I genuinely care about this community. I have been putting the work. I have been a devoted Democrat. I have worked for this party and lived by the Democratic values my entire life since before I even can vote. And so I hope that people will take away that in the sense that people just want their day in court, whether you're the accused or you're a victim, and they just want to be heard, and I'll be the candidate that listens.
Ramona Martinez is running for district attorney in New Mexico's 3rd Judicial District. Ramona, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back with our next candidate, so stick with us. And now joining me is the current district attorney for New Mexico's 3rd Judicial District, Gerald Byers. District Attorney Byers, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So first question, tell us about yourself and your qualifications to serve as the district attorney in Doniana County.
Excellent question. As you noted, I'm the incumbent district attorney elected in 2020. I've been a prosecutor for going on 27 years this coming July. I've prosecuted in Texas and in New Mexico. I've prosecuted a death penalty case, one of them which was resolved by a guilty plea, the murder of Marissa Matthew Zeifler in the Sunshine Theater in 2003. That brought about Marissa's Law, which made great changes to sex offender registration and things of that nature. I've prosecuted in Texas and in New Mexico, and doing so along the border, prosecuting everything from shoplifting to homicide. Prior to that, I graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy, served on active duty as a naval officer, East Med, deployment to Beirut.
I see. So what sort of reform in New Mexico's criminal justice system would you like to see?
I'd like to see an improvement on how our current bail reform process is conducted. Frankly, the way it is being done right now, there are a lot of situations where the intent, the original intent, which was noble, which is that people should not be languishing in jail pending trial just because they can't pay a cash bond. I agree with that. But unfortunately, the way the rules are written and the way the rules are interpreted, a lot of times individuals who are patently dangerous and then they go out and commit more crimes while they're out on conditions of release. That is happening way too frequently, victimizing way too many members of the public, and frankly, the public that I've heard from, they're outraged by it. So I think that there's room for improvement on that.
And District Attorney, what do you think of using harm reduction as a way to deal with nonviolent offenses such as low-level drug possession?
Good, excellent question. There are some things that the criminal justice system is not particularly suited to address. In other words, oftentimes you'll hear the phrase, the police can't arrest their way out of a problem. Well, the criminal justice system can't necessarily prosecute its way out of a problem either, especially if the problem has its origins in societal issues such as addiction or emotional problems or mental health issues. And so in those situations, it's important for the system to have the flexibility to consider other options than incarceration for resolution for a problem. For example, a person can be diverted to a program of treatment and counseling and medical intervention if they have a substance abuse problem, or they can receive batterers intervention programs for domestic violence situations, things of that nature. Those can have a tendency to have a long-lasting positive impact on people who at the current time we just see as numbers or criminal defendants.
I I see. And District Attorney, how would you improve how have you improved collaboration between your office and local law enforcement?
Excellent question. We regularly meet with the law enforcement partners associated with criminal justice in our jurisdiction. And I'll give you an example. We have recently met with Chief Jeremy Story, the leader of Las Cruces Police Department, and his command staff on the issues of recidivist offenses, particularly those that are plaguing the local businesses, and issues involving competency, because that creates a lot of repetitive issues, not to mention the retail crime. And so we have open lines of communication. We identify those folks who are essentially crime generators in our district, and we take steps to try to mitigate that.
And so explain how you handle fatal use of force incidents involving law enforcement within your office. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yes, I can. They're essentially called officer-involved incidents or officer-involved shootings. As the district attorney, I'm the one who makes the determination as to whether or not the officer who used deadly force should be charged with a crime or should not. We recently reviewed a situation in which LCPD former officer Felipe Hernandez shot and killed Teresa Gomez. After a review of the officer-involved incident task force's information and their investigation, I made the determination that charging him with second-degree murder was definitely appropriate. I can also tell you that there's not another single candidate in this race that has that experience or that has ever even done that. Officer use of force is a very critical aspect of policing and social justice, and if you'll recall, back in June of last year, I penned an opinion piece that was printed in the local newspaper explaining to folks what the historical view of the authority of police officers in the use of deadly force is, to try to get information out there so people would have a better understanding of the extent of authority that officers have whenever they are going out to protect the public, because the officers are using the authority and authorization that has been provided to them by us, the members of the public.
I see. So moving on, what do you feel needs to be done to address the backlog of cases in our court system right now?
I can tell you that before the case management rule, which was implemented in June of last year, there was a backlog of cases. That backlog of cases came from a number of sources. One of them primarily was being the coronavirus, which hit this district as well as all of the rest of them throughout the state, and the New Mexico Supreme Court issued rules and regulations that severely restricted the ability of courts to hold trials, but they still had to keep the courts open, so it was a very delicate balance. And so that added to the case backlog. The case management rule, by its mere structure, essentially requires the elimination, shall I say, of a number of cases that were backed up in the pipeline system, as if you will. When the case management rule became effective in this district, 550 cases were dismissed overnight. That was not by a willful choice of mine. As a matter of fact, we had to go back and re-indict at least 330 of them. But that was a determination that was made by the court to effectuate and implement the Supreme Court's implementation of the case management rule. It sets timelines which are very, very strict and very tight, and one of the primary functions of the case management rule, according to the information we got from the Supreme Court, is that its purpose is to make prosecution more efficient.
I see. And so moving on, and this is a big question, how do you navigate competency and pretrial detention laws in order to keep dangerous individuals off of the street?
Excellent question. Two parts, two different tracks, pretrial detention and competency. I'll address pretrial detention first. Although the rule provides that the state can file a motion to detain a person pretrial and present only affidavits, the obligation on the state in this district has been that not only do we provide affidavits, but we also provide live testimony from witnesses. We do that. We present pretrial detention motions every day on individuals who we believe are a danger to either themselves, the community, or a particular victim in a case. And that is something that we have been fastidious about. And I can tell you that there are a number of individuals who we have filed pretrial detention motions on. Our motions to keep that person detained have been denied, and then the person goes out and commits more crimes. As far as competency is concerned, competency, the root issue of competency, or the problem for the solution, is that there are no resources in the state of New Mexico. We only have one place, Las Vegas, New Mexico, the Behavioral Health Hospital. That is the only place that under the system a person can be ordered to. Well, we need more infrastructure. We need more doctors. We need more facilities. And that is not something that I, as the district attorney, or any district attorney, can resolve. We don't have that power. The courts cannot resolve it. They don't have that power. So what the best thing that we can do is abide by the rules of procedure that the courts provide, which allows a determination of competence or incompetence. And if the person is able to be treated back to competency, we pursue that. If the person is not dangerous, then the case gets dismissed.
I see. And so, just as my last question, District Attorney, what sets you apart from your opponents, and what is your appeal to voters as we move forward toward the June primary?
What sets me apart is I'm a prosecutor, not a politician. I'm not doing this because I need a job someplace else, because I lost my prior job. I'm not doing this because I'm a defense attorney and I wanted to do something else. No, I have been doing this and sacrificing for the people of the state of New Mexico for going on 27 years as a prosecutor. I'm committed to it and have been committed to it. And I have done every type of case that there is, and supervised attorneys and managed attorneys in many different offices throughout this state. And one of the things that people need right now is the assurance that the person who's at the helm of the prosecution office knows what they're doing. This is not something that you learn OJT. This is something that you have to have the background and experience for. You don't want a rookie doing your brain surgery. So that's why I'm the best candidate for this job.
I see. Well, thanks so much for being here. Gerald Byers is the District Attorney for New Mexico's 3rd Judicial District. I appreciate you coming in and giving us the time today.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back with more candidate interviews on the way, so stick with us. And now joining me is former Doña Ana County Manager Fernando Macias. Mr. Macias, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Absolutely. So just as my first question, can you tell us about yourself and your qualifications to serve as the District Attorney in Doña Ana County?
All right. So my wife Claudia and I have raised 4 daughters here in the Doña Ana County area. All of them are graduates from New Mexico State University. So I'm here by way of Gadsden High School, New Mexico State University, Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C. is the educational background. And of course, I've had a number of positions. I've been blessed with the opportunity to serve as a district court judge, including the chief judge of the district court, in the state senate as a county commissioner, and in a variety of administrative roles for prominent organizations.
I see. So to get to the next question, what sort of reform in New Mexico's criminal justice system would you like to see?
Well, certainly there's a slew of different necessities to improve the criminal justice system. One of them is the timely prosecution of cases. That certainly has to be at the forefront of the concern of the public, because it takes so long to complete many of these cases. And in all fairness to both the victim, the victim's family, and the defendants, spending years waiting for resolution of the cases is really unacceptable. So part of my focus would be to shorten the time frames, to organize early, to either make a determination that the case is one that can be resolved, or it is one that will go to trial, and that it goes to trial on a timely basis, because the district attorney's office has been able to provide all of the information that is necessary to proceed with the prosecution to the defense attorney that is representing the defendant.
And so what do you think of using harm reduction as a way to deal with non-violent offenses such as low-level drug possession?
Well, certainly I've had the opportunity already to preside over drug courts, the adult drug court, the juvenile drug court, the family reunification drug court in civil abuse and neglect cases. So I believe that there are opportunities to intervene early. I believe in giving people those opportunities to reform their lives, to improve their lives. But again, there has to be a level of accountability at all levels, at all cases, and there has to be a commitment on the part of the defendant to really believe that they can embrace and change the direction of their lives.
And Mr. Macias, how would you improve collaboration between your office and with local law enforcement should you be elected to the position of district attorney?
One of them is very simple. Convey what the expectations are. Law enforcement is absolutely critical. They're at the forefront of the criminal justice system. But again, there has to be an understanding and a level of patience that is necessary to accumulate all of the information that will lead to the successful prosecution of a case.
I see. So can you explain, going off of that, can you explain how you would handle a fatal use of force incident involving law enforcement within the county?
The equal justice is the standard, and the criminal law applies to everyone equally. So it is really no different in terms of assessing whether there was criminal liability. One understands the pressure that law enforcement has to deal with, the constant challenges that they face in the community, but one recognizes that they have elevated levels of training and there's higher expectations in terms of how they control the situation and the amount of force that is absolutely necessary. But it would be as in every other determination. Where is the fairness? What are the circumstances? What is the evidence to support the action? But most of all, to be fair to the individuals and to explain to them what is the basis that would support the successful prosecution. And if it isn't there, to have the courage to tell people there will not be a successful prosecution in this case, and you have to understand it makes no sense to be able to go forward with these cases.
And Mr. Macias, this is something that you touched on earlier in our conversation, but what needs to be done to address the backlog of cases within our court system right now?
Certainly having a fully staffed office, having them fully trained, but a lot of it is just the process, the procedure. I'm very oriented to understanding what is the task that has to be accomplished. Regardless of what level of organization that you participate in, you always have goals, you always have requirements that must be met, and you manage to accomplish the goal. You understand what efforts are necessary to get you there, and a lot of upfront evaluation of the cases, especially by senior management within the district attorney's office, and not individual assessment, but a team of individuals assessing every case and whether or not it has the requisite evidence to support going forward with a conviction. So in assuming this office, which would occur the 1st of January of 2025, it's going to be incumbent to go back and make an assessment as to whether some cases drop between the cracks that should be revived, has the opportunity to be revived, and then proceed with the prosecution of those cases.
And moving on, how would you navigate competency and pretrial detention laws in order to keep dangerous individuals off of the street?
Well, certainly competency is not an issue that can be addressed in a very short period of time. But there are ways to address competency issues within a relatively short period of time. The Doña Ana County Detention Center has a full-time psychiatrist. It has staffing that is oriented to intervening in behavioral health issues, because many of the individuals coming into the detention center are dealing with mental health issues. So there's already a base to be able to assess what medication is necessary, keeping them in an environment where they're receiving 3 meals a day, where they're not exposed to the elements, where they're off illegal drugs. All of that coordination can really play a much more critical role and more effective role in helping individuals reach competency in order for them to properly address the charges that they face.
And Mr. Macias, this will be my last question. What sets you apart from your opponents, and what is your appeal to voters as we move closer to that June primary?
Well, I think my greatest strength is the history of high levels of responsibility that I've had to assume in the different positions. I've already been a district court judge that 90% of the cases that I handled were criminal cases. I know where the choke points are in the criminal justice system. I know how to address them. But more importantly, I've already borne the responsibility and the burden of running large operations, large governmental operations, where I feel my opponents really have never had a day of management responsibility. And it is the focus that people have to understand. It isn't whether you can prosecute one case, whether you're a good prosecutor, because people that have held this position, they know how to prosecute a case. Where the failings have been is that they don't know how to operate the office in a way that can address 3,000 cases a year. I've had all of those experiences repeatedly during the course of my career. So I can assure the voting public that I bring a level of experience unlike any of the other candidates that are running for this position.
Well, I appreciate you coming in today, Mr. Macias. Mr. Fernando Macias is running for district attorney in New Mexico's 3rd Judicial District. I appreciate you coming in and sharing with us and the voters your platform today.
Thank you. And I look forward to more dialogue and continued conversations with media and the public to better inform them of the operations of the criminal justice system.
Certainly, and we do appreciate that. We have one more interview left, so stick with us here on KRWG TV. And now joining me is attorney Scheherazade Booth. Attorney Booth, thanks so much for being in studio with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So first question, just tell us about yourself and tell us about your qualifications to serve as the district attorney in Doña Ana County.
So my family's been in the community now for about 20 years. And in that time, I went off to law school, came back. I started as a prosecutor at the 3rd Judicial District Attorney's Office, which is here in Doña Ana County. Then from there, went to Deming and finished my career there as a deputy district attorney. From there, went on as a law clerk at the U.S. Attorney's Office, then opened my own practice where I now do private criminal defense work for the state and federal. I'm a mom. I have an amazing 7-year-old, a wife, daughter, wonderful people in this community, and have had a great time doing it.
Very good. Well, next question. What sort of reform would you like to see within the New Mexico's criminal justice system?
So right now we do have certain programs that allow for pre-prosecution diversion and different diversion courts. I would like to see us make better usage of those things so that people are able to get all the benefits that some people can get out of being on probation or having the weight of the criminal justice system, but not necessarily the ramifications. So when a person picks up a felony, you lose the right to vote, you can lose the right to bear arms, but you also can lose the right to even rent a home or pick up student loans. So when we're able to give people all of the benefits that you can get from finally figuring out that there are social services out there for you to have that kind of safety net, then we're able to affect change without unintentionally harming their lives.
I see. And in a similar vein, what do you think of using harm reduction as a way to deal with nonviolent offenders, such as low-level drug offenses, things like that?
I think that's absolutely one of the best ways we can go about doing it. You know, we do need to be cautious to understand that just because there might not be a victim of a crime doesn't mean that they're victimless crimes. So property damage can be just as detrimental to a person as say, some of the violent crimes that we can come across, but they often get sidelined because shoplifting or property damage aren't seen as victim-based crimes. But in the same breath, if you continue to have things taken from you or you continue to have your windows broken, eventually you could be forced to shut down your business and you could be forced to end up closing and maybe even moving out of our community. So we have to give all crimes, victim or not, the same level of priority. But that doesn't mean that necessarily the defendant needs the same level of weight, if you will, that others. That we have to look at those diversion courts that we talked about in order to say, how do we fix whatever it is that you're going through so that you're not continuing to victimize our community.
And Sherry, moving on, you know, if elected, how would you improve collaboration between your office and law enforcement within the community?
One of the easiest ways to do it is, frankly, reaching out. When I went into Deming, one of the biggest things that I found is that the officers said, what does it matter? You're not going to prosecute the cases anyways. And that's kind of the feeling that I'm getting here. And what I had to do while I was there, especially as a deputy, is show them, no, your case matters. And if we were dismissing a case, I sat the officer down and talked to them about why we were dismissing the case, so that they had a buy-in to understand that maybe it was something that happened wrong while they were out on the streets that we can fix from here on out, or maybe there's a reason, a policy issue that we want to try to further, like we talked about, those diversion programs. Maybe this defendant qualifies for that, and that's why we did that. But it really just starts with communication, and you have to be the first person to reach out to say, listen, I don't know what happened before I got here, but I can tell you from here on out, it's about collaboration and working together.
Explain how you would handle a fatal use of force incident involving law enforcement.
So right now we do an investigation that's done with an agency that wasn't involved. So let's say it's the city, so LCPD, that's involved in the shooting. New Mexico State Police or DASO or Doña Ana Sheriff's Department needs to be the one that investigates it. It can't be its own. And then what we need to do is the task force. The task force sits down and evaluates whether or not it's a use of force. But truly, we also need to be honest about the fact that these officers should be in and out of our office every day as a district attorney. And these are officers that we should be building a relationship with. So instead of looking for the pizzazz or the press of saying that I'm going to prosecute or I'm not going to prosecute, whatever the answer may be, we do need to be honest and not be politicians for a moment and say, maybe I need to give this to another office, an entirely different district attorney's office, to evaluate and possibly choose to prosecute at that point.
I see. So what do you think needs to be done to address the backlog of cases in our courts right now?
Part of me running was looking at the systematic failures that are happening at the district attorney's office now. And one of those biggest issues are the lack of staff. So I reached out to experienced prosecutors that are still in this community but prosecuting in neighboring districts. And I asked them, I said, if I win, will you come back? And I have commitments from 6 of them that said, yes, I'll come back with you. So day one, we're starting off fully staffed with a group of prosecutors who have done this before and have been doing this entire time. Those prosecutors can help to evaluate and assess what is going on with our current caseload. From there on out, we need a restructuring of the office. Right now, one attorney does all of the intake and dismissals and plea agreements that happen in this office. We're the second largest jurisdiction in New Mexico. That's truly impossible for one person to do. So we need to restructure how that looks with 2 chief deputies and then a series of deputy district attorneys that are able to do that job and help manage those senior trial attorneys and associate trial attorneys and give them the kind of mentorship that needs for those cases coming through.
Thank you for that insight. Next question, how would you navigate competency and pretrial detention laws in order to keep dangerous individuals off the streets and off the streets?
So what I would like to do is dedicate one prosecutor to repeat offenders, to look at these cases of people who are repeatedly coming through our system. You have to remember that we as a society voted on this bond reform for a very genuine and beautiful thing. It's that it doesn't matter how much money you make, that shouldn't determine whether or not you sit in custody waiting for your case to go to trial. So we can't fall back into this idea saying that we need to backtrack on that money should determine whether or not you're released. And what we should do instead is what the law says, and that's file motions and present evidence that if a person should not be released, it's because they're a danger to our community or they're a flight risk. And we have to actually follow through with those motions. Right now they're getting filed, but in all the ones that I'm seeing and hearing about, no evidence is actually getting presented. So when the judge is presented with essentially just a motion, but no witnesses, no evidence or anything, of course, society, we want to blame the judge and say, how dare you let them out? But the reality is, that's all the judge could do because they were presented with zero evidence.
And final question, Sherry, what sets you apart from your opponents, and what would your appeal to voters be as we approach that June primary?
So early votes started now. So hopefully everyone gets out and votes now. And the reason why I am the best candidate for this is because I'm the only one that has deputy prosecution experience. I've run an office before, I can run an office again. And I'm the only one that has defense experience coupled along with it. So I've seen both sides of it. I've both walked a defendant through and seen what can happen to a person whenever they have a felony. I understand that impact that can happen to a family. But I was Prosecutor of the Year for Domestic Violence, Community Hero Award winner for the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I've sat and made a career out of defending victims of violent crimes and children of violent crimes. And having that experience both in running an office, but in also managing a team of prosecutors and inspiring them to move forward makes me the only fit for this job.
Attorney Booth, thanks so much for being in studio today and answering our questions.
Thank you for having me.
That concludes our interviews with the candidates running in the district attorney race for New Mexico's 3rd Judicial District. Back to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Johnny. We now get some analysis on this race. Joining us is Justin Garcia, reporter at the Las Cruces Bulletin. He's been covering the race for district attorney in the 3rd Judicial District. Justin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Public safety has been a major issue for many folks in this area. Is it the top issue in this race?
Yeah, it absolutely is the top issue. I think public safety, the nature of the office obviously lends itself to a lot of discussion and conversation about how to affect crime and how to affect specifically obviously prosecution, but yeah, it's the only thing they're talking about.
Some of the candidates that you have covered in this race have brought up bail reform, the issue of that. Can you kind of share with us a little bit of analysis of what's being brought up?
Yeah, so bail reform, it's being brought up in a couple of different contexts, right? Bail reform is one of those things that I think people bring it up and they sometimes mean different things. But in the context of this race, the incumbent brings up bail reform a lot. Gerald Byers brings up bail reform a lot because it's one of the things that he points to as being a systemic challenge that any district attorney, including him, has to sort of work around. And the other candidates have looked to it and said, well, you know, you guys the office should be pushing more for pretrial detention, which is the system that's in place to, if a prosecutor believes that a defendant is dangerous and that there are no conditions of release that can keep the public safe, that person should be held essentially indefinitely until trial. That they should be using that more or using it in different circumstances. But the line between those two spaces has been the incumbent feels, well, this is a systemic thing and this is just how it is. And the challengers say, well, you know, you can be doing this and you can be doing that and you can be doing that. So that's been essentially the line for that.
Behavioral health, a major concern for a lot of folks in the area. It's been brought up in this race as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's been brought up with the candidates? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think the space that comes out in is through discussion and conversation about diversionary courts. That's the primary. So obviously, the district attorney's office is not like a mental health hospital or really capable of doing that. But there's been a lot of the candidates. Actually, every candidate has said that bringing more people into diversion courts is something that they would prioritize if elected.
So this seems something that most or all of the candidates are in favor of?
Yeah, I don't think any of them. They have different opinions about when to do that, right? I think candidate Sherry Booth has talked a lot about wanting to take those diversion courts, essentially wanting to a lot of times with diversion courts you have to be convicted before you get access to that stuff, right? A lot of the candidates, including Sherry Booth, have said, well, how do we get people access to these resources before conviction?
So there's certainly a ripple effect if you do have the conviction or felony on your record.
Yeah, things like it affects your ability to do anything really, get a job, buy a house, all that kind of basic stuff. So, especially when it comes to like Veterans Court, that's a big space in which there's a lot of conversation about trying to get people resources, trying to get defendants resources before they're convicted, and potentially as an alternative means of conviction.
It's kind of is a good segue to talk about competency issues. Yeah. I know this is something that the candidates have brought up in different forums. You've done some extensive reporting on just the history of competency in New Mexico. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I tricked my editor into letting me talk about the 100-year history of competency and how there's a case from the territorial days that affects the way we think about it now a lot. But it's essentially it's more narrow, I think, than people often think. It's if I was a defendant in a case, right? There's a sort of fundamental question about if I'm unable to assist in my own defense, if I'm unable to understand kind of the what's happening and what's going on, and I can't contribute to my defense at all, then there's this question about, well, can that person really be held? Can that person really be tried if they're not really aware of what's going on, right? And so then if the answer to that is no, then it brings up all these other questions about, okay, well, what do you do with this person, right? For very serious cases, oftentimes that person is sent to the mental health hospital in Las Vegas. In a lot of lesser situations, that's not the case. What'll happen a lot of times is they'll maybe receive some treatment. If they happen to have a good family support system, that really helps them get access to treatment. But if they don't have that, then they kind of just are left to just return to society without having any change.
Are any of the candidates bringing up infrastructure when it comes to competency and what happens with that issue?
Not really. Not so much. The competency issue is fundamentally a legislative issue. There's a lot of talk that the special summer session competency is gonna be a big focus of that, but no, not particularly. Again, there's been, if you asked one of them about that, I would bet you that they would probably want to talk about diversion courts. They would probably pivot that question to talking about diversion courts, but yeah, not in terms of infrastructure for it.
I certainly want to talk about, how the state legislature may address some of these issues in this summer. But I want to move on and talk about Doña Ana County being a border county. Now, some of the candidates have brought this issue up. Can you share with us how they're talking about how they would be in this role serving in a border county?
When we, as part of the bulletins reporting on this, we surveyed our readers, and issues around immigration were one of the really common things that our readers wanted us to ask the candidates. Immigration is obviously, it's legally speaking, it's a federal issue, right? So if somebody crosses into the United States, that's a federal question, not a state of New Mexico question. The incumbent Gerald Byers has, oftentimes during debates and forums and in my interviews with him, he's brought up a recent initiative of his office to collaborate with Border Patrol, specifically in some issues around in the Sunland Park area. A lot of times you'll see situations where people are crossing into the United States, and there'll be individuals who kind of drive them in that area, and then the Border Patrol will engage in chasing them, and then so there's a number of kind of potential like state crimes that occur in those situations. His office is attempting to prosecute more of those.
Caseload management, an issue that was brought up by the candidates, and how that's being, processed. So can you talk with us a little bit about that issue?
Yeah, well, that was a really interesting one, because that way back a million years ago in 2022, I wrote a story about the case management order. It's essentially a Supreme Court decision to essentially expedite what's the caseload of the Third Judicial District Court. And there's a ton of factors that go into that. But it really became an issue. It really became an issue during kind of the early parts of this year, when a series of KFOX reports confronted the incumbent about the caseload. Right? There was this question about, well, how many case dismissals have you had? Well, how many? And he kind of declined to answer that, and so that kind of really brought to light the dismissal question. So, to kind of get back to your original question, there's definitely a ton of dismissals, and there has been really for the last year or two. Part of that was because the COVID-19 pandemic created a large backlog of cases when trials essentially stopped and then were kind of pushed to be on the phone and then resumed in person. That created a big backlog. The office also chronically, for really 2 district attorneys' offices now at this point, has chronically suffered from high turnover rates. And anyone who's ever worked in a place where there's high turnover knows that every time somebody leaves, they leave with all the knowledge that they have about how things operate. So that creates backlog. So that's the Supreme Court of the state of New Mexico kind of looked at that situation and said, well, let's put this case management order over Doña Ana County. Let's create these timelines for different cases depending on essentially the severity of the alleged crime, and let's clear this number. Let's make the line go down essentially, and that has been successful. There are more jury trials. Cases are moving faster, but especially I think in the first 6 months or so, that really led to a ton of cases being dismissed, including very serious ones. Like there was a murder case that was dismissed, I think, as one of the first ones that went through that process. So it's most cases obviously that go through the district court are not murder cases, but it includes serious ones like that as well.
I see. Now you brought up one issue, staffing concerns and high turnover rates within the office. What are candidates saying that they want to do to address that?
Yeah, that's been the biggest point of drama in these debates and forums. The 4 challengers pointedly and explicitly blame the incumbent for that. They say that they reference his leadership style. They point to, 3 of them are active defense attorneys in this community. And so they often bring up anecdotes of working against inexperienced prosecutors, having issues of discovery violations, that kind of thing. The incumbent kind of then turns that around and says, well, there's a number of, he points to this kind of more system-wide issue of, well, there's not that many lawyers in this community. There's a number of issues. He's spoken about, we're only funded to have so many issues as a state entity, only funded to have so many positions as a state entity. He also has referenced some issues around the fact that if a lawyer is good at being a lawyer, then larger private law firms take notice and essentially poach their employees. The challengers don't really buy that argument. Again, they bring it back to him as being the problem. So obviously the voters will be the ones to kind of decide that issue in June and November.
Speaking of decisions, the Supreme Court, obviously you mentioned how they've played a role, but there's also state lawmakers going to Santa Fe this summer for a special session to talk about public safety and address issues. What sort of issues during that special session do you think are going to impact this office?
I think competency, we talked about it before, but when I speak to lawmakers both on and off the record, competency is the thing that they are talking about a lot and that they are not super thrilled about. One lawmaker who I spoke to on background was really, really concerned that the bill was not going to be ready, essentially, by the time the session rolled around. Lawmakers presented a competency reform during the regular session at the beginning of the year. That bill was as one person put it, not ready for prime time. There's definitely a fear that that's going to be the situation again this time, that the bill is just not going to be ready. It's going to have contradictions in it. It's not going to be able to address the issue. And again, I mean, I think there's this conflation between competency and mental health issues, right? Competency is this very narrow thing where can you assist in your defense, right? That's the question. There's other issues of like, well, someone may be able to assist in their defense, but their specific and unique mental health situation is putting them in situations where they commit crime.
It's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. Justin Garcia is a reporter at the Las Cruces Bulletin. Justin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's all of our time for this special Newsmakers. Thank you to all of the candidates who joined us for this program, and a special thanks to Justin Garcia for sharing his reporting on this race with us. The New Mexico primary election is Tuesday, June 4th. A reminder, we want to hear your questions for candidates running in elections this year. What issues do you want candidates to weigh in on? You can submit your questions at krwg.org, where you can always keep updated with the latest news. Thank you for joining us for Newsmakers featuring election 2024 coverage. I'm Anthony Moreno.